On the western edge of Utah Lake, about 55 miles from Salt Lake City, there is a lonely, windswept hill. It is a desolate place, covered in dry sagebrush and cheatgrass, where the silence is broken only by the howling wind and the occasional cry of a coyote. If you were to hike up this hill today, navigating the rough terrain under the vast desert sky, you would eventually stumble upon something that looks out of place. It is a flat, rectangular slab of concrete set directly into the ground. It has no handle. It has no hinges. It is not a door meant to be opened. To the casual observer, it looks like a capped well, or perhaps a sealed utility access point. But this concrete slab is actually a gravestone. It is the only marker for a tragedy that played out in slow motion beneath the earth. A tragedy so disturbing that authorities decided the only way to end it was to seal the location forever. Beneath that concrete, winding deep into the crust of the earth, is a labyrinth of narrow, twisting tunnels. And somewhere in that darkness, roughly 150 feet below the surface, lies the body of John Edward Jones. He is not lost. This is not a mystery where a man vanished into thin air. We know exactly where he is, down to the inch. He is trapped in a fissure so tight, so remote, and so unforgiving that the earth itself claimed him. He remains there to this day, frozen in time, encased in stone in the exact position where he took his final breath. This is not just a story about a spelunking accident. This is a story about the primal, suffocating horror of confinement. It is a story about the absolute limits of the human body and the agonizing choice between risking more lives or leaving a good man behind in the dark forever. This is the horrifying story of the Nutty Putty Cave disaster. To understand the nightmare that unfolded on November 24, 2009, we first have to understand the beast itself. Nutty Putty Cave was discovered in 1960, and from the very beginning, geologists knew it was something strange. Most caves we are familiar with, like the vast chambers of Carlsbad Caverns, are formed by water dripping down from the surface over millions of years, dissolving the rock and creating large, open spaces. But Nutty Putty was different. It was a hypogenic cave. It was formed by superheated water rising up from the bottom, forcing its way through the limestone, dissolving the rock from the inside out. This process created a cave system that was not a series of rooms, but rather a complex, three-dimensional sponge. It was a chaotic network of tight tubes, sharp turns, and sudden drops. The walls were not made of hard, dry stone. They were lined with a smooth, slippery substance, a type of silica clay that felt weirdly soft to the touch. This unique texture is what gave the cave its whimsical name, Nutty Putty. When this clay was dry, it was abrasive like sandpaper. But when it was wet, it became slick, acting like a lubricant that allowed explorers to slide into tight spaces with ease. However, this same clay made it nearly impossible to slide back out against gravity. For decades, this system was a trap waiting to spring. It was aggressively tight. The map of the cave reads like a warning label, with sections named the Helmet Eater, the Scout Eater, and the Maze. It was a place that demanded respect and punished arrogance. In fact, before the tragedy of 2009, the cave had already tried to claim lives. In 2004, the cave flashed a warning sign that went largely unheeded. Two separate Boy Scouts, in two separate incidents within the same week, became wedged in the cave's narrow restrictions. In one of those incidents, a 16-year-old boy got stuck in a vertical squeeze. It took rescue crews 14 exhausting hours to extract him. They had to use complex pulley systems, vegetable oil, and brute force to pop him free. Following those near disasters, the cave was closed. Gates were installed. A strict management plan was put in place. Officials believed they had tamed the danger. They believed that, with the right protocols and a reservation system, Nutty Putty could be safe for the public. They were wrong. The cave had merely been sleeping. Enter John Edward Jones. In 2009, John was 26 years old, and he seemed to have the world at his feet. He was a dedicated medical student at the University of Virginia, with dreams of becoming a pediatric cardiologist. He was a man of deep faith, known for his kindness and his driven personality. But above all, he was a family man. He was a loving husband to his wife, Emily, and a doting father to their 1-year-old daughter, Lizzie. And the couple had even more good news. They were expecting their second child. John was not a reckless thrill seeker. He was not an amateur who wandered into a hole in the ground without a plan. He was smart, responsible, and experienced. He had grown up in Utah and spent much of his childhood exploring the underground wilderness with his father and his brother, Josh. They were a family of adventurers, and they knew the rules of the underground. They knew how to move, how to conserve energy, and how to navigate. On the Thanksgiving holiday of 2009, John and his family returned to Utah for a visit. It was supposed to be a joyous homecoming, looking for a way to bond and recapture some of the magic of their childhood adventures. John proposed a trip to Nutty Putty Cave. He hadn't been in the cave since he was a child, and he wanted to experience it one last time before the responsibilities of his medical career took over completely. It was organized as a fun, nostalgic outing. John, his brother Josh, and 9 other friends and family members planned for a simple evening expedition. They expected a few hours of squeezing through mud and rock, laughing about old times, and then returning home in time for pumpkin pie. At 8 p.m. on that Tuesday evening, the group parked their cars at the base of the hill. The night air was crisp and cold, but inside the cave, the temperature was a constant, humid 55 degrees. As they slipped through the metal grate and descended into the darkness, they had no idea that they were walking into a geological tomb. For the first hour, everything went according to plan. The group moved through the upper sections of the cave, known as the Big Slide, navigating the twists and turns with the ease of experienced cavers. The atmosphere was light. They were laughing, calling out to one another, and enjoying the physical challenge of the subterranean gym. But as they ventured deeper, John, feeling confident and eager to tackle the famous obstacles he remembered from stories, decided to look for a specific formation known as the birth canal. He separated slightly from the main pack. He was looking for a challenge. But deep in the dark, a simple navigation error was about to turn a fun holiday trip into the worst nightmare imaginable. As the group moved past the initial chambers and descended into the belly of the cave, the atmosphere began to shift. The playful energy of the surface was swallowed by the oppressive weight of the rock above. Nutty Putty was not a cave that allowed for casual movement. It demanded constant physical negotiation. The walls were lined with a viscous, slippery residue, the cave's signature clay, that felt like wet rubber against the skin. It coated their clothes, their gloves, and their boots, making every movement a calculated battle against friction. The air here was thick and heavy, carrying the scent of damp earth and ancient dust, a smell that had been trapped there for millennia. It was here, in this suffocating humidity, that the group reached a challenging junction known as the Big Slide. This was a steep 45-degree slope that descended into the lower, more difficult sections of the cave. John, feeling the adrenaline of the descent and eager to tackle the famous obstacles he had heard about, decided to separate slightly from the main group. He had a specific goal in mind. He wanted to find the formation known as the birth canal. In the lore of Nutty Putty Cave, the birth canal was a rite of passage. It was a notorious tight squeeze, a passage that required a caver to suck in their stomach and wiggle through a narrow opening. But the reward for navigating it was relief. The canal was known to open up into a large, comfortable room on the other side where you could stand up and stretch. It was a challenge, certainly, but a manageable one for someone of John's size and experience. Scanning the walls with his headlamp, John found a hole. It was a narrow, vertical fissure located near an area known to cavers as Ed's Push. To John, in the limited, dancing beam of his light, it looked exactly like the entrance to the birth canal. It was positioned roughly where he thought the canal should be. It looked like the right size, and so, trusting his instincts and his memory of the map, John made a decision that would unknowingly seal his fate. He entered the tunnel head first. In the world of caving, there is a golden rule that is taught to every beginner. Never go head first into a tight, downward sloping restriction unless you are absolutely certain you can get through. If you go in feet first, you can use your arms to push against the walls and lever yourself out. But if you go in head first and gravity takes over, you are committed. Your arms are pinned uselessly at your sides or forced above your head. and there is no way to reverse. John was inching his way down a fissure that was not horizontal. It was a chute, angled downward at roughly 70 degrees. Imagine a slide made of jagged, unforgiving rock, barely wider than a basketball hoop, and coated in wet, slick clay. As John pushed forward, using his hips and fingers to inch himself along, the tunnel began to constrict. The walls pressed in on his shoulders. The ceiling scraped against his helmet, forcing his neck into an awkward angle. But John, believing he was in the birth canal, expected this. He thought that if he just pushed through this one tight spot, the tunnel would widen, and he would drop into the larger chamber below. He continued to slide. Gravity was pulling him down, and the wet clay was acting as a lubricant. He saw a small widening ahead, a lip of rock that looked like the end of the squeeze. He told himself that he just needed to get his chest past that lip, and he would be free. He prepared himself for the final push. This is where the physics of the human body clashed violently with the geology of the Earth. To get through a space smaller than his ribcage, John used a common technique known to spelunkers. He exhaled. He emptied his lungs of every cubic inch of air to shrink his chest cavity. This momentary reduction in size allowed him to slide his torso over the lip of rock. It worked. His chest passed the restriction. But when he tried to inhale again, his chest hit the walls. He was now wedged, and to his horror, the space in front of him did not open up. Closed down. He was not in the birth canal. He had entered an unmapped, dead-end fissure that acted like a funnel. It tempted explorers in, but it did not let them out. The tunnel ended in a small crevice, barely large enough for an arm, but certainly not for a human body. John realized his mistake instantly. He tried to back up. He tried to push himself upward using his hands. But caving creates a cruel paradox in tight spaces. The friction of the rock allows you to slide down with gravity easily, but those same walls act like barbs when you try to move up against gravity. His ribs caught on the rock. His clothes bunched up around his waist, acting like a wedge that locked him in place. He was stuck, and worse, he was upside down. The angle of the tunnel meant that all the weight of his body was now pressing down on his chest and head. Gravity, which had helped him slide in, was now an enemy that refused to let him go. He was pinned in a space approximately 10 inches high by 18 inches wide. His left arm was pinned underneath his body, completely immobile. His right arm was forced backward. His head was lower than his feet. For a moment, there was likely absolute silence. The kind of heavy, crushing silence that is only found deep underground, where the world above feels like a distant memory. John likely struggled, thrashing his legs in the free space above him, trying to find purchase, trying to find leverage. But every movement only caused him to slide a fraction of an inch deeper. The walls of the cave, covered in that unique, slippery clay, acted like a piston, sealing him into the earth. The fun was over. The nostalgia was gone. In the blink of an eye, a family adventure had transformed into a fight for survival in a stone sarcophagus. He was trapped in a space so tight that he could not fully expand his lungs to scream. He could only take shallow, panicked breaths. He waited for his brother. He waited for help. But deep down, as the blood began to rush to his head, John must have realized that he had crossed a line from which there might be no return. The trap had snapped shut. Deep in the earth, the silence was broken only by the ragged, terrified breathing of two brothers. Josh Jones had squeezed as far into the crevice as his body would allow. In the beam of his headlamp, he could see nothing but darkness, and his brother's tennis shoes sticking out of the rock face. The angle was severe. John was not just stuck, he was being swallowed. Josh called out, his voice trembling as it echoed off the cold, damp walls. "John, I am going to pull you out. Okay. I need you to push when I pull." From the darkness below, a strained, muffled voice replied, "Okay, do it." Josh reached forward, grabbing John's calves with both hands. He braced his boots against the slick clay walls for leverage. He grit his teeth and pulled. He pulled with every ounce of strength he possessed, screaming with the effort, his muscles burning as he fought against the friction of the cave. For a brief, hopeful second, John moved. His body slid upward a few inches. Relief washed over Josh. It was working. But the moment Josh loosened his grip to reset his hands for another pull, gravity instantly reclaimed its prize. John slid back down the chute with a sickening thud. And this time, he did not just return to his original position. The momentum wedged him even deeper into the narrowing funnel. A sharp cry of pain erupted from the hole. The slide had jammed John's chest even tighter against the rock, forcing the air from his lungs. "Josh, stop," John gasped. "Stop. It hurts too much." The reality of the situation crashed down on them. Physical strength was not enough. The cave was too tight, the angle too steep, and the friction too intense. Josh realized that if he stayed, he could do nothing but watch his brother suffer. He had to leave. He had to get help. Promising John he would return, Josh scrambled backward out of the tunnel, fighting his own rising panic, and began the desperate crawl back to the surface. He burst out of the cave entrance into the cold night air and scrambled up the hill to find a cell signal. With shaking hands, he dialed 911. The time was roughly 9 p.m. The call that went out to the Utah County Sheriff's Office was chilling in its simplicity. "My brother is stuck in Nutty Putty Cave. He is upside down. We cannot get him out." While sirens began to wail in the distance, down in the dark, a silent and insidious killer was already at work inside John's body. To understand why this situation was so dire so quickly, we have to look at the physiology of inversion. The human body is an evolutionary masterpiece designed to function in an upright position. Our circulatory system, our organs, and our skeletal structure are all built to work with gravity, not against it. When you flip that system upside down, everything breaks. John was a medical student. He had spent years studying anatomy. He knew exactly what was happening to him, which perhaps adds a layer of psychological horror that is difficult to comprehend. He knew that his heart was now fighting a losing battle. Typically, the heart pumps oxygenated blood down to the legs and torso, and gravity helps the deoxygenated blood drain back from the brain to the heart. But now, the mechanism was reversed. John's heart had to pump blood up against gravity to get it to his feet. And worse, the blood that was in his legs and torso was now rushing down, pooling in his head and lungs. This leads to a condition known as pulmonary edema. As the pressure in the blood vessels of the lungs increases, fluid begins to leak from the capillaries into the air sacs or alveoli. Essentially, John was slowly drowning in his own fluids. His face would have begun to swell almost immediately. His eyes would have turned red as the capillaries burst from the pressure. A pounding headache, driven by intracranial pressure, would have started to throb behind his eyes, a relentless drumbeat marking the passage of time. But the immediate threat was even more mechanical. John was folded. His body was bent like a fishhook in the narrow tunnel. His chest was pressed against the rock floor, and his back was pressed against the rock ceiling. Every time you take a breath, your ribcage needs to expand. Your diaphragm needs to move down. But John had no room to expand. The rock walls were an unyielding corset. To get oxygen, he had to take shallow, rapid sips of air. This shallow breathing means less oxygen enters the bloodstream to feed the panicked brain, and less carbon dioxide is expelled. This creates a deadly feedback loop. As the carbon dioxide builds up, it triggers panic. Panic releases adrenaline. Adrenaline tells the heart to beat faster and the lungs to breathe harder. But the heart is already failing, and the lungs have no room to move. The more John panicked, the faster he died. He lay there, in the absolute crushing dark, feeling his own biology turn against him, counting the seconds between heartbeats, knowing that each one was harder than the last. By the time the first responders arrived at the base of the hill, it was past midnight. The scene on the surface was chaotic. Floodlights cut through the darkness. Heavy machinery was idling. Men and women from the Utah County Sheriff's Search and Rescue Team were suiting up. Among them was a rescuer named Susie Modela. Susie was small, tough, and an experienced caver. She was chosen because she was one of the few rescuers small enough to even fit into the tunnel where John was trapped. She entered the cave, crawling through the mud and the slime, dragging her gear bag behind her. It took her nearly an hour to navigate the twists and turns to reach the fissure near Ed's push. When she finally arrived, she shined her light down the hole. All she could see were John's navy blue running shoes. "Hi, John," she called out, her voice calm and professional. "My name is Susie. I am here to get you out." John's response was heartbreakingly lucid. The fluid had not yet overwhelmed his brain, but his voice was thick and strained. "Hi, Susie," he said. "Thanks for coming. But I really want to get out." Susie wasted no time. She tied a piece of webbing around John's ankles. She braced herself against the walls, finding small nooks for her boots. She gripped the webbing and leaned back, using her entire body weight to pull. She pulled until her muscles trembled. She pulled until the webbing dug into her hands. But John did not budge. He did not move a millimeter. To Susie, it must have felt like trying to pull a concrete block out of the earth. The friction was simply too great. The physics were impossible. It was like trying to pull a cork out of a wine bottle, but the cork is made of flesh and bone, and the bottle is made of jagged rock. Susie stopped, panting, wiping sweat from her eyes. She realized immediately that manpower alone would not work. They could not just pull him out. They needed mechanical advantage. They needed pulleys, anchors, and heavy equipment. She radioed back to the surface, her voice grave. "We cannot pull him. He is wedged too tight. We need the gear. We need the drills." As the message was relayed up the chain of command, the scope of the disaster became clear. This was not going to be a quick extraction. This was going to be a siege. And down in the tunnel, John's heart continued to beat against the gravity of the entire world. By the afternoon of Wednesday, November 25th, the sun was high over the Utah desert, but down in the dark, time had lost all meaning. John had been trapped upside down for nearly 20 hours. His body was failing. The fluid in his lungs was making it difficult to speak, and his heart was beating erratically. But on the surface, a massive, coordinated effort had finally come together. Over 100 people were now on site, including heavy machinery operators, trauma doctors, and elite cave rescue specialists from across the state. They knew that manpower alone had failed. They knew that simple ropes had failed. They needed physics. The plan was ambitious and complex. The rescue team brought in heavy-duty drills and climbing hardware to construct a compound pulley system deep within the cave. They called it a 9-to-1 mechanical advantage system. In simple terms, this meant that for every 1 pound of force a rescuer pulled with on the rope, 9 pounds of force would be applied to John's legs. It was a system capable of lifting a car, but it had to be built in a tunnel barely wider than a man's shoulders. The team, led by a rescuer named Ryan Shorts, began the grueling work of drilling into the cave walls. But Nutty Putty fought them every step of the way. The cave was not made of solid granite. It was made of that soft, hydrothermal limestone and clay. Every time they drilled a hole for a bolt, the rock would crumble. It was like trying to drill into hardened brown sugar. The dust from the drilling filled the stagnant air, making it hard to breathe. The rescuers had to search frantically for competent rock, testing spot after spot, looking for anything solid enough to hold the immense tension they were about to apply. Finally, after hours of agonizing work, the system was ready. They set up anchors using natural rock arches and camming devices. They threaded the ropes through the pulleys. Ryan, who had stayed near John's feet to coordinate the operation, leaned in close. He checked John's condition. John was drifting in and out of consciousness, his speech slurred from the pressure in his brain. Ryan spoke loudly, trying to anchor John back to reality. "Okay, John," he said. "We are ready. We are going to pull hard. It is going to hurt your legs, but we are getting you out of here." John whispered back, his voice barely audible. "Just get me out. I do not care about my legs. Just get me out." The command was given. The team lined up along the rope in the narrow passage above. On the count of 3, they pulled. The ropes tightened. The anchors groaned against the soft rock. The tension in the system built up like a coiled spring. 1, 2, 3, pull. For the first time in nearly a day, the impossible happened. John moved. He did not just slide a fraction of an inch, He moved significantly. The compound pulleys were working. They pulled again and again. Slowly, agonizingly, John's body was lifted out of the narrowest part of the pinch. He was pulled up high enough that his chest was no longer fully crushed against the rock. The pressure on his ribcage released. For the first time in 20 hours, John took a deep breath. The relief was instantaneous. The fluid in his head began to drain slightly. The panic subsided. Down in the hole, Ryan smiled. He could see the change in John immediately. The mood in the tunnel shifted from despair to cautious elation. They were doing it. They were actually beating the cave. John looked up at Ryan. His eyes, though bloodshot and swollen, were clear. "Feels good," John said. "I can breathe again." He asked Ryan to get word to his wife, Emily. He wanted her to know he was coming out. He cracked a weak joke about how bad his breath must smell. The rescuers laughed, a sound that seemed alien in that oppressive place. They began to prepare for the final stage. They passed down water and an 4-bag, preparing to stabilize John once he was fully extricated. They just needed to reset the pulley system for the final series of hauls that would bring his waist through the constriction. Once his waist was clear, the nightmare would be over. Ryan adjusted the ropes. He checked the angles. He was positioned right above the opening, monitoring the primary anchor point, a natural arch of rock that was bearing the brunt of the weight. The tension on the system was immense, hundreds of pounds of torque stored in the nylon lines and metal carabiners, all held by that one piece of stone. It was the only thing standing between John and the abyss. And then, without any warning, the cave struck its final, fatal blow. Snap. It was a sound like a gunshot, loud and violent, echoing through the confined space. The natural stone arch, weakened by the drilling and the immense pressure, shattered instantly. It simply exploded. The entire pulley system, under hundreds of pounds of tension, recoiled backward with the force of a whip. A heavy metal carabiner, flying through the air like a piece of shrapnel, struck Ryan directly in the face. The impact was devastating, knocking him backward and nearly severing part of his tongue. He was instantly concussed, blood filling his mouth. But the true horror was what happened to John. With the tension suddenly released, gravity, the patient killer, instantly reclaimed him. John plummeted back down the chute. But he did not just fall back to where he was. The force of the drop, combined with the slippery, lubricated clay walls, drove him down with incredible violence. He fell deeper than he had ever been before. He was jammed into a section of the fissure so narrow that his chest was instantly compressed. Ryan, waking up from the concussive blow, groggy and bleeding, realized with horror what had happened. The rope was slack. The hole was empty. He crawled forward, spitting blood, and looked down. "John!" he screamed. "John!" There was silence. Then a faint, ragged struggle for air. The sound of a man whose lungs were being crushed. John was now wedged so tightly that he could barely draw a breath. All the progress, all the hope, all the engineering had been erased in a fraction of a second. The fall had likely broken his body, but the suffocation was the immediate threat. Ryan tried to reach him. He tried to grab the rope, but his own injuries were severe. The other rescuers scrambled to help, but the situation had turned catastrophic. The anchors were gone. The rock was crumbled. There was no stable place to drill a new hole. There was no time to build a new system. They had fired their last bullet, and the gun had exploded in their hands. The hopelessness that filled the tunnel in those moments is impossible to describe. It was a heavy physical weight. They knew, Ryan knew, and deep down, struggling for every molecule of oxygen, John knew. The rescue was over. The long wait for the end had begun. Following the catastrophic failure of the pulley system, a heavy, suffocating silence settled over the tunnel. The frantic energy of the rescue attempt had evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard realization. John was no longer speaking. He was no longer struggling. His breathing, which had been ragged and loud, had quieted to a shallow, inconsistent rhythm until eventually it stopped altogether. A paramedic from the rescue team risked his own life to crawl down the unstable, crumbling tunnel one last time. He reached the point where he could see John, but there was nothing more to be done. At 11:57 p.m. on Wednesday, November 25th, 2009, exactly 27 hours after he had entered the cave, John Edward Jones was pronounced dead. The cause was cardiac arrest, brought on by the immense strain on his body and the difficulty of breathing in the inverted position. The news had to be carried up, hand over hand, through the darkness, back to the surface where John's wife, Emily, and his brother, Josh, were waiting. One can only imagine the scene at the cave entrance as the rescuers emerged. These were tough men and women, professionals who had seen accidents before. But they walked out with their heads down, tears streaming through the mud on their faces. They were exhausted, traumatized, and defeated. They had held John's life in their hands, they had spoken to him, they had laughed with him, and in the end, the physics of the earth had simply been too strong. But the tragedy was not over. Now, the authorities and the family faced a gruesome logistical problem. John was dead, but he was still wedged upside down in a narrow, unstable fissure deep underground. The discussion that followed was practical but horrific. To remove his body, rescuers would have to do the unthinkable. Because of the bends in the tunnel and the rigor mortis that would soon set in, they would not be able to simply pull him out. They would have to break his bones. They would have to snap his legs, dislocate his hips, and drag him out piece by piece. Furthermore, sending rescuers back into that specific tunnel was incredibly dangerous. The rock near Ed's push had been destabilized by the drilling and the failure of the anchor. There was a very real risk that if they tried to extract the body, the tunnel would collapse, killing the rescuers. The sheriff turned to the Jones family. He laid out the options, and in an act of incredible grace and sorrow, the family made a decision. They would not ask the rescuers to risk their lives again to retrieve a body. John would stay where he was. Nutty Putty Cave would become his final resting place. A week after the incident, the silence of the desert hill was broken by the roar of heavy machinery. This was not a rescue operation anymore. It was a burial. Crews arrived with explosives. They drilled into the rock ceiling of the tunnel leading to Ed's push, placing charges to collapse the roof. With a dull boom that shook the ground, the tunnel was brought down, burying John's body under tons of stone, ensuring that no one would ever disturb him. Then the concrete trucks arrived. They backed up to the main entrance of the cave, the same hole that John had crawled through with a smile on his face just days earlier. The chutes opened, and wet cement poured into the throat of the cave. They filled the entrance shaft completely, sealing it from the bottom up. Finally, a flat concrete seal was poured over the surface opening, capping the well forever. Today, if you visit that hill in Utah, it is quiet. The wind howls through the dry sagebrush and the cheatgrass. A small plaque has been placed on the concrete seal. It lists John's name, his date of birth, and the date of his death. It serves as a headstone for a grave that extends 150 feet down into the crust of the planet. The cave that tempted so many with the thrill of the squeeze, with the challenge of the birth canal and the scout eater, is now closed to the world. It exists only in the memories of those who explored it, and in the nightmares of those who tried to save John. The tragedy of Nutty Putty is a story that haunts everyone who hears it because it touches on a universal fear. The fear of being restricted, the fear of the dark, the fear of being unable to save the ones we love. John did not die because he was foolish. He did not die because he was reckless. He died because of a simple mistake, a wrong turn of a few feet in a world where inches matter. It serves as a permanent, concrete reminder that the earth beneath us is indifferent to our lives. It does not care if we are fathers or doctors or brothers. To the cave, we are just soft biology in a world of hard stone. John Edward Jones rests there now, embraced by the earth, in the longest, darkest night imaginable. But he is not alone. He is remembered by a loving family, by a daughter who grew up knowing her father was a hero, and by the millions who have heard his story and felt the weight of that stone press against their own chests. If you made it this far, thanks so much for watching. This was a difficult story to tell, but an important one. If you have a story suggestion, feel free to submit it to the form found in the description. Also, if you want to support the channel and help us create more documentaries like this, consider joining the Patreon or becoming a channel member here on YouTube. Anyways, thanks again, and hopefully I will see you in the next one.